U.S. He's a long-tenured market strategist and business technologist in the wireless industry. He specializes in 802.11ac, DAS, wireless public safety, in-building, and smart city initiatives. He's also an advocate for technology disruption for startups and successful go-to-market strategies. I will have Steve introduce his panelists. Thank you.
Thanks. Do I have a clicker? Oh, that's the clicker. Okay, great.
Let's do the next one for you. There you go.
Great. This is going to be a fun panel. I've been looking forward to this past couple weeks, talking to each other, and we're going to take a deep dive today. The relationship and dependencies between location and connectivity, both in terms of DAS, small cell, Wi-Fi, and fiber, are changing. REITs have been tasked to create the workspace of the future and at the same time drive meaningful economic development and value. The smart city movement with IoT, machine-to-machine, vehicle-to-vehicle, vehicle-to-infrastructure are creating new demands for densely increased infrastructure. From a regulatory perspective, in-building DAS is largely unregulated. The business is driven by property owners, anchor tenants, and wireless carriers. Recently, CBRS, the Citizens Broadband Radio Services, have come into the proverbial squared circle as a potentially low-cost way to provide wireless service using the 3.5 band. CBRS could offer a lightly licensed spectrum for authorized shared access for up to 6 years between the 3500 and the 3650 band. Wireless carriers, enterprisers, venue owners, and others can all deploy 4G LTE networks in this 3.5 band. So it's becoming apparent that there's an increasing role for LTE-U and the 3.5 CBRS as operators are looking to leverage fixed and more condensed mobile footprints. So we've got a lot to discuss, but first let me introduce my esteemed panelists. Ben Edmond is the CEO of Connected to Fiber. Ben's been in the fiber industry since the mid-90s. He founded Connected Fiber in 2015, which is a SaaS solutions platform on location intelligence. Ben's business has been doubling each quarter, and he successfully raised his first round of funding with VCs, so congrats. He's also known as a data geek, but many may not know that he's backpacked through Asia in the 90s. Bill DelGrego is the Executive Director of Business Development at Extenet. He's a former U.S. Air Force colonel and fighter pilot for 27 years. He served 17 duty stations and had 3 overseas tours and 3 combat tours. He retired in 2007. He was a vice president at Accenture Federal Service for 4 years. He owned his own consulting company for a number of years and is now the executive director of Extenet. And one of the reasons why he joined was because he enjoys working with high integrity people. Art King, director of enterprise services and technologies at Spider Cloud Wireless. Art does a lot of things, and interestingly enough, Art runs a farm between Seattle and Portland, and he breeds sheep and turkeys. Art's dogs compete in various sports, and they work on the farm. So, welcome, gentlemen. So let's start this off. Yeah, sure. Okay, Bill. Describe how is the technology within commercial real estate converging today?
Okay. First, is this on? Hello. There we go.
All right.
Hey, quick question for you guys, because it never happens, seems like, when I see these panels. How many of you are real estate focused, completely real estate focused? Okay. How many are vendors of some sort? Yeah, it's usually the biggest crowd. Carrier individuals working for Sprint or T-Mobile? Okay, great. Yeah, I just, you kind of want to know the audience as you go through this, but Look, there's a lot going on in the space. All morning, you've heard about the price pressures and what companies like ours, which is a third-party organization, really we call ourselves a service provider for communications infrastructure, and how we have to transform to meet the needs of Dave from AT&T sitting here saying, really can't afford to do what we did in the past and pay for this stuff. We're hearing that from all the carriers. And so as we have multitude of these real estate customers out there that are starving for this fourth utility, we have to come up with creative ways to pay for these things, to help them see the value. So the convergence part is what we're trying to take on, which is to say, while our core competency for many years was pure DAS from 2002 till now as a company, we recognize that really it's about our customers. So in the indoor space, that's the real estate owner and the tenants that are paying good money to be in these buildings. They also need every technology that they should get to run their businesses or do what they need to do, and that's, the Internet of Things that we, continue to talk about as those all converge to some reality. Fiber is the backbone, and we put a lot of fiber in a lot of buildings, mainly just for DAS, but now for lots of other things. So we're going to our real estate owners now and telling that maybe the way to get a DAS in your building is to do the other things. And if you go to the next slide, do other things that are values for your buildings, which is to provide multiple services for your tenants and to make your building the slickest things in sliced bread in the sense of all the things you can save if you do your building management systems correctly. So why not piggyback on the fiber and the other things we've done in the past and converge all that so there's value in this. So now you tell a real estate owner, if you're saving dollars in this way because you're providing the quality that the tenant needs and you're saving some dollars on lighting and signage and security and some other things, maybe that helps you pay for the DAS or get the things you really need, Wi-Fi or whatever else. So that's kind of our changing philosophy over the last couple of years to think about how to do this versus it just being one stovepipe of these, 12 or 14 things on this slide are generally in a commercial real estate building stovepiped activities. Try to put them all together and create a single source of value for that real estate owner, that money he can make in some areas, and this stuff translates into the technologies that he needs in the building.
Great. So follow-up question on that. How is this convergence impacting the licensed and unlicensed frequencies?
Well, it's the wild, wild west out there with the unlicensed stuff. So on the licensed, I don't think there is much change because of the FCC rules are what they are, as long as everyone kind of follows the rules on the other equipment they have in there. Are we seeing more interference and things like that in buildings? Maybe a little bit, but that mainly is because, again, they're stovepiped. And so we don't know what one company's doing to design something, say public safety. They design their public safety and want to put their antennas in the same place we want to put our DAS. The antennas are too close to each other. The frequencies are close to each other, and therefore we get interference. So once that's resolved, if you get kind of in a full convergence with the real estate owner and you say, let's look at all the designs together and make sure they talk to each other or don't talk to each other, then I don't think there's an issue on the FCC licensed frequency side. On the Wi-Fi side and the other unlicensed, obviously it's a challenge. And everything a tenant wants to do or a building owner wants to do in their common space has to be looked at, and I don't think that's going to change over the next few years.
Mark?
I would add that the IT people in the enterprise that occupy the building may have veto authority over any kind of use of unlicensed frequency by other parties. It's this paradox that enterprise IT people think that it's actually licensed to them inside their building.
So, Art, what's happening today in the DAS industry, and specifically the relationship between the 3POs, the real estate, owners and wireless service providers?
We're seeing this transition of the problem moving from the operator paying to solve it to the enterprise or the building, and the situation's getting tougher. And when some of the leasing agents are walking in with a Verizon and an AT&T mobile, and if they don't have 5 bars of one of them, they won't commence a real estate negotiation or even walk the property. So you're starting to see pressure put, especially in the pre-sales process, where if it isn't there, they don't even want to approach it, because if it's kind of promised in a tenant improvement, it may not happen, or it may not happen to the satisfaction of the enterprise customer. I mean, it's a big issue in terms of the viability of certain properties now, as you put in lead glass, and someone's going to save a lot of money by saving electricity by putting in new glass, but you can't push signal into the building any longer, and somebody needs to remedy that.
Bill? Did you want to comment on that?
Well, no, I was just going to say, look, there's a lot of different commercial real estate owners. I mean, we heard a couple up here, Boston Properties and Vernado. They kind of, in my view, as a third party, we got pushed out of because they were smart enough to see that they needed to do this, and so they made arrangements directly with carriers to make it happen, and that was a smart approach. Let's be honest. They also recognize that their tenants are going to need it, and they've bought into the concept from many years ago of this fourth utility. We still see, though, my role is to go to see real estate owners, right? Managing directors, asset managers, people trying to add quality and value to their buildings. So if, let's say it's a REIT and they're in funds and they want to sell this thing 3 years from now, what do I need to do to make it a higher level of technology? So I think that the more we do these things, and that's why I always ask, are there any real estate? It's a shame we don't get more real estate asset managers or venue people in here to kind of listen to what's going on, because as Dave mentioned from AT&T, we still have the real estate owner that says, I'm not paying for any of this, but you're going to make it happen. and that's just not going to happen in the tier 2 and tier 3 environments. So I think the more you discuss it and talk about ways to get everyone to contribute in some form or fashion, then we can work a deal. But the education has to come into commercial real. I mean, what do we think is touched right now? 2% or less of the market when it comes to in-building of any kind. So there's a whole bunch of opportunity, but there's a whole bunch of education that needs to be done out there.
Ben, you've experienced some dynamic growth over the past few quarters. How is smart cities playing into all of this, and how is it affecting your business?
I think smart cities is a pretty critical aspect because it's getting a lot of mind share out there. I don't ultimately think it dramatically touches the inside of the building from a services perspective. But when you talk about what's going on in the market, there's some fundamental shifts that are happening, going from carriers funding these systems to a more value-based approach, which is unrefined and still being thought through between tenant and building and carrier. And a core component of the cost structure lies in the raw infrastructure. And when you look at what smart city projects and efficiencies are bringing to the table, it's the build out of that underlying infrastructure in areas that's vastly needed, whether it's the physical poles outside the building, the conduit system, the dark fiber to connect the facility. Because ultimately, as we sit here and talk about in building, what really matters is not just the coverage in the building, but how it connects to the outside world. And that whole paradigm is shifting as well of where and what it's connecting to, and getting the right infrastructure in place inside the building, as well as enabling it to the carriers, the cloud, the content, matters as far as how people are thinking about things today, at least from our perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think you're spot on. We've got a few real estate owners that get that they can contribute via not throwing dollars into the pot, but building out some of the infrastructure themselves. So for example, they'll make the commitment to provide the HVAC power space on their dime for a head-end room, or they'll use their internal structured cabling company to put the fiber and cable, which therefore then reduces what we've got to go out and get labor for, and therefore the price to a carrier. It's one part of the business model that if you can put that in front of a carrier that a normal 1 million square foot building would be 2 to 3 million, is now 1.5 because the owner did this. And then on top of that, you put in front of the business case that this enterprise client inside there has this many people and potentially this many of your phones. Then you're building the business case, which I think is a big job of all of ours, is to build the business case for the carriers to move it up, right, from the below red line dollar point to something that's palatable. And I think Dave sees that when he has to do the priorities in his AT&T role. He's got a red line for what he can spend, and if you're down here, but you can prove the business case up here, he'll move it. So.
And when you start injecting, variables like the lease rates, the occupancy rates, the term length from a real estate ownership perspective, when you start introducing the efficiencies of IoT and the enablement to get those sensors connected to operate, tall, shiny buildings more efficiently from an energy perspective, all those things play a role back into the equation. And layer on, ultimately what drives everything. It's the tenant's, desire for value. And to me, it's not wireless as the fourth utility, it's connectivity. They want to be connected, whether it's on fiber when they're at the desk, or they get up and walk to the conference room on Wi-Fi, or they go down the hall to a shared office and they get onto an LTE connection. They want it seamless, fast, and always on. And it's about the applications. It's, increasingly seeing tenants shifting their application stack, driving their business outside the four walls of the building into somewhere else. And when that happens, and we're still in the early innings of that, the dependency, the speed, the focus on how you connect will just increase in pressure and visibility and frankly, opportunity.
Art, the carrier wants to get their captive audience, and REITs, middle price DAS, those size applications between 100,000 to 500 or 650,000 square foot, those size applications are opening up more for the third-party operator models. How is this affecting your tactics and strategies with working with the REITs versus a year or 18 months ago?
The REITs are actually approaching us, and what we're tending to do is pass them to SIs like Extenet, who have the capacity to service them. As an equipment manufacturer, we're not in the business of taking care of the installation and integration and stuff, but we do work with a REIT to paint the value proposition of a system. And then really, they've got, other partners that they work with that actually will do the implementation business. But the interesting thing that we're seeing is on the financing side, where you have people that want to put money to work, and the building owner doesn't want to pay. The enterprise will pay if it's a small OpEx amount. So you're seeing people who can't find ROI in the market for their capital, offering to fund cellular systems for credit-worthy customers as a financing vehicle. So it's been something that's been emerging over the last year and a half, as people have realized that there can be revenue to be gained just by funding systems.
So the CBRS is really a hot topic right now, and this lightly licensed spectrum is offering shared access with short ranges, access for other carriers that could shrink down into denser networks. And Wi-Fi networking is tough business these days, because you got to put it up, and then there's interference issues, and there's users putting up adjacent networks at the last minute. As a follow-up here, do you see this as an opportunity outside the carrier? So can Joe, the enterprise, put it in their own office, and what do you think they intend to do with it?
We're also members of the CBRS Alliance, and there's work going on to develop protocols so that the CBRS infrastructure allows you to do a multi-operator configuration. So much like today, the solution to the problem is a wideband antenna in base stations. CBRS turns it upside down by basically saying, we're going to have one single frequency and access method, and all the cellular radios will possess that radio. So there's work being done so that you can walk into a building and the CBRS equipment will be home to multiple operators, and all the operators will all be advertised on that same piece of infrastructure. So it's going to change the dynamics of the installation and create a multi-operator environment that hasn't existed yet in the small cell universe, at least.
Ben, how's that?
I think for us, it's still out. It's kind of like when we were talking small cells 5 years ago. It's just one of those things that, okay, it's out there. There's that band that's there. There's the technology that hasn't kind of been brought to bear by what the carriers think of it. It's a roaming kind of mentality, right? If you're going to have this in your building, the theory is your new 5G phone enabled with 3.5 will roam naturally onto it or whatever. And so for us, it's just still a little bit out there, but I will tell you, we are talking as another, when we give industry updates to our real estate owners, especially our real estate owners that are kind of innovative and creative and want to know what's happening in the market, we talk about it and let them know. But I guess it's a we'll see kind of thing at how it gets incorporated, and will it really be something that in that 100 to 300,000 square foot building, will it be at a price point that is acceptable to a real estate owner to give them the solution?
I think that price point conversation is probably the key in the equation, because clearly the market wants it. There's evidence from the alliance participation, from the carrier side, from the equipment side, the desire to push forth from a consumer of the opportunity, the real estate owner or the tenant. That multi-carrier solution is extraordinarily attractive. So whether the economics can get there to drive adoption, I see it as a likely path. And the improvement in performance and consumption in the building will just continue to be matched by the consumption of the tenants. If you look at the shift from the wired world of increasing speeds, as the technology continues to advance in DWDM or fiber-based solutions, the users just continue to consume more and more. And I think that shift happens in the wired world as well as the wireless world.
Let's go back to IoT. Bill, with concepts and new innovations today with IoT, it's changing almost daily. New companies are popping up and adopting new technologies, new go-to-market strategies. How has this changed your tactics and strategies with going into the real estate industry?
Well, I hate to say it, but it comes back to the simple, what's the pipe? What's the backbone if you're putting in, X hundreds of strands of fiber, and then all of these neat tools that are going to be there for the smart city or the smart building, they still need that. So, as Jim was talking about can't believe we're still using coaxial and ceilings. There's more wire and wireless than anything else, I've ever worked on in my life. So the reality is that backbone's still got to be there, and not just in the building, but it's got to be in the streets to get to the building. And, part of the dynamics of what we all go through is, hey, we'd love to not put those big head ends in buildings, so that means we have to do something somewhere else. So we put in a centralized RAN somewhere, but that costs money too. And a lot of times, believe it or not, based on price points for fiber in the streets or in leasing a space to do what we need to do, it's more expensive than putting the head end in the building. So hence, we're still back to, that's why a head end is there. Now, if the equipment were to change, the BTSs or something different and all that, that's different. But price point is everything, and but the convergence via that ultimate pipe, that ultimate backbone, is what IoT has to ride on, whether it's the car that drives itself or the refrigerator that talks to the internet. There's nothing different.
So last week, you've all seen John Laguerre, T-Mobile spent $8 billion, and roughly about 45% of the available low-band spectrum. And FCC says this is beachfront spectrum. And I'm wondering, do you think that this is good indoor spectrum, in your opinion, Art?
Well, there's coverage and capacity. You know, what we see, so in the Verizon deployments, we're seeing band 4 and band 13, which is AWS and 700 megahertz. The radios prefer, the mobiles actually prefer the AWS spectrum because they're looking for capacity indoors. So, you know, we see a lot of need for huge amounts of capacity inside. But also for places where you're not going to light them up with any interior signal, it's very nice to have that 700 megahertz kind of coming in, and the 600 with T-Mo is going to be very nice indoors. I mean, T-Mo's done a whole, you know, inversion on their reputation when they did the band swap with Verizon a couple years ago. Well, they swapped AWS and 700 because their network is a heck of a lot better now that they've done the 700 macro, you know, outdoors. So, you know, but capacity matters, especially to enterprises. The need to have, you know, good support as far as big downloads and that type of thing. In LTE, when you're going through walls, you can lose something like 90% of your resource blocks in the signal, and you may have 5 bars of signal, but you have little in the way of capacity. So it's, you know, you need both.
I think it's a good play for them. I think it's really smart. They went to a low frequency that can penetrate better than anything. And while they won't maybe get to use it till maybe 5G's out in 2019 or 20, I think was a smart investment on their part. Absolutely.
Agreed. Not much to offer other than, you know, I see it as a great move from their perspective, and increasingly, I mean, you see the challenges of, you know, the dependence on Wi-Fi inside the building with the lack of consistency, the issues you have. So as carriers develop solutions that give that smartphone better service, better performance, or the tethered or the untethered device, you know, there's a dramatic shift, and the consumptions do shift over time.
Okay, so looking back at the smart city initiatives, there's certainly been a lot of movement with it last year with Department of Transportation and the Smart City Challenge. There was 78 cities that applied, 7 finalists, and ever since then there's been a big movement. One of the key areas here with the smart city push has been the V2V and V2I, and I'm interested specifically with this movement growing exponentially in the U.S., the transportation and driverless vehicles being a big part of this focus. What do you think about both of these technologies, V2V and V2I, and how does it play with you know, how you're going to market?
I think, you know, from our perspective as a layer of intelligence to understand who has what where, you know, where to navigate. I mean, when you talk about a driverless vehicle, you know, my first thought is latency. So that proximity to the intelligence, the controls has to be there, and it can't have gaps. So you can't, you know, drive the car on the highway and have, you know, fantastic latency and control and get off the on-ramp and, you know, you need to send a stop signal and there's no point to touch. So, you know, really understanding the overall, you know, long-term infrastructure plan, how it gets built, how it's tethered in proximity, and then gets back up into the controls and the intelligence from there.
You know, I think this topic's actually pretty cool, but it's, like you said, latency is the big issue. I mean, I've seen some studies where there's some REITs out there that in certain areas where parking is outrageously expensive, they're talking about making parking garages that are to the top of the vehicle, because basically the concept is, you know, you'll get dropped off at the front door and then your car will go park itself. So therefore a human being doesn't have to walk into that parking garage. It just goes in and finds the spot, and then when you call your car, it'll back out. But of course, you got to have a network in that parking garage, right? So it knows where the spot is, and so who's going to pay? You know, we're back to the how much wire can you put in a parking garage to make sure the latency is the way it should be for that car to be able to park itself and then come pick you up. I mean, so it's cool, right? It's the Jetsons. Oh, I just showed my age, right? I mean, but it's the Jetsons, but it's going to be really how we get there is going to be remarkable, but. We'll see what happens, you know.
And I live in an area with macro coverage from only 2 of the 4 majors. So the cars would stop when they hit my neighborhood if they came in on the other 2.
So we're talking about emerging technology. We're talking about a lot of disruption. And it seems to me that small and agile has been kind of the big winner for differentiation for business and creating competitive advantages. Past year, I think my company, Comba, has been an example of this. But Ben, what do you think are some of the largest companies and upstart companies? So 2 different dynamics. Who in the industry, in our industry, who do you admire and why? What do you think they're doing differently? Sure.
I think there's great examples on both sides of the equation. The really large entities, and you look at from a machine to machine or IoT, depending on your terminology. Both AT&T and Verizon are doing some really innovative, cool things. Whether it's through acquisitions like Hughes Telematics or just organically developing the capabilities, but. Both of those companies are clear leaders right now in the IoT machine-to-machine space, and they're engaging the market and leading the way. And I think that's commendable, and they're putting the resources behind it to make it happen. At the other end of the spectrum, I think there's really interesting things going on as the hardware companies have to reinvent themselves, and there's big examples of that with guys like Cisco buying Jasper to get into the machine-machine space and innovate there across the cloud of networks so that it truly has a real enterprise-based solution. And that's, that to me is intriguing and leads to just, continued growth as people really look to solve for use cases. And outside of there, I think there's interesting things on the infrastructure side. Guys like Edge Connects that are building content closer to those real estate buildings, closer to the people. Shifts where traffic patterns go, whether it's in the wireless ecosystem, the peering ecosystem, or others. And as that edge, consumes more and more of the content, that need for massive fiber and the build out of wireless infrastructure inside the building just continues to increase.
Bill, same question.
Hard to say. I mean, I'm going back to my DoD experience, and the DoD research side of the house does a lot of things with machine to machine, especially for our special forces guys. I think about some of the missions that I flew from 2002 to 2004 over Afghanistan and Iraq, and we were doing machine-to-machine transfer of targeting and all those things. It's been, 13 years since I did that. That technology is out there, and the Lockheeds and the General Dynamics and all those things, they're not dumb. They turn it into commercial application. And so those kind of things are part of what I think we can all look at and see how we apply it in our space. We were talking before about how to determine whether or not you have a high data consumption in the previous panel. And there are tools out there that I don't know if you know, but you can go kind of monitor what's going on with social media in a city. And that is an indicator. If you look it up online, there's some companies that do that. They're pretty innovative because they're looking at the amount of, either Facebook, Twitter, whatever's going on in a certain part of a town, and you just, for whatever reason, that means there's a lot of data going on there. It also translates to the carriers as there's probably a lot of use of their devices. So it's another way to kind of look at this. And then as we go forward, I think there'll be a lot of dynamic retasking of the networks. So, he mentioned a college football stadium. that has 6 games a year, you spend $4 or $5 million to do that. I'm pretty convinced that in the future, what's going to happen is when the game's over, those antennas are going to, move up. They're going to pop out, and they're going to now, Monday through Friday, look at the city streets and the rest of the campus. They're not going to be just focused on the stadium any longer. That's the kind of things in technology that can then create a value where now an AT&T might pay for that stadium that has 6 because they're going to get a bang for their buck the rest of the year. So dynamic software, dynamic retasking, however you want to call it, software-defined networks, those are all keys to make sure we continue to add value and get the use so there's a bang for the buck.
Great. Art?
Same question?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Any of the large firms in Silicon Valley that have enough horsepower to change existing practices, and a lot of the smaller firms that are changing models and pushing things in a different direction than where they're going now. We're, as an industry, we're like a battleship, and you start turning the wheel on the bridge and it's just got a 5-mile turning radius. So the people that are on the bridge right now that have turned the wheel, they're all really anxious for change to happen, and it's still just a long process to filter down through organizations that we need to do things differently, we need to behave differently, we need different technology. There's a lot of change that needs to happen, and there's lots of people pushing to make it change.
Excellent, excellent. Well, we have a few minutes left. Let's open it up for some questions.
See, we've been talking in the ether, and so you can't come up with a question for the ether. Let me add reality to this. Is the Internet of Things is something that you can't really get your arms around and figure out who's going to invest in it. Until it becomes some sort of reality that has to be done. So, for example, we get asked a lot of times, do you want to be the participant on a new city that's going to go up here? And of course, the value doesn't come out until 10 years later, till after some commercial real estate, retail, residential, and everything moves in there. So it becomes difficult for a company like ours to invest in stuff like that because we're all semi-short-term minded, right? And so that's the problem with Internet of Things, is how do you get the investment, someone to look out into that future and say, I'm willing to put down X millions right now to lock up the fiber in the streets because I see 8 years from now, I'll get a return on it. That's the difficult part, the financing part of it. And you have to have the visionary billionaire that wants to do that. So that's, to me, the reality of why these things stay stovepiped. You get individual technologies that are great and can be used now or within 1 year, and they stay stovepiped, but they don't become, a holistic, nice, converged capability.
I've got a question over here. You're going to get another entry in our giveaway for that question, so thank you.
Oh, fantastic. I didn't even know I was in a giveaway.
There you go.
What do you see finally pushing the networks over the edge? Is it a public safety application to maybe help people get out of an emergency situation, or is it driverless cars? Because one parking lot isn't enough.
So the question is...
Is there going to be an app that finally pushes everybody to, some kind of emergency response app or something that forces us to develop a denser network?
Great question. When you look at some of these emerging companies that are just popping up, and especially with even millennials coming up with new companies that from a software as a service or software-based applications, it definitely makes it dynamic where they can help bundle multiple services together. But panelists, you want to?
I mean, I really see it as no one wonder app, but the convergence of compliance, efficiency, and cloud, if you would. The software continues to drive the intelligence of in the business, in entertainment, others. As that shifts outside the four walls or the hardware in front of you, drives network, the reality that compliance does matter, public safety does matter, and instituting the standards for whether it's location level intelligence all the way to the floor, or coverage for our firemen and police throughout the building. That compliance aspects will continue to drive more of the right infrastructure, but only when it's a converged thought process. When it continues to stay stovepiped, we're missing an opportunity collectively in the industry. And same with broadband internet or other things. I mean, they all have several common denominators around, fiber infrastructure, structured cabling, and others that we should be taking advantage of an industry of, taking CapEx out of the overall equation.
Yeah, so to your point too, it's also implementation specific. So the system that our company builds, one implementation in the US, first responders can get to postal address, floor, zone on floor. In another implementation, they go to postal address. So it's a matter of either the service provider not seeing ROI in doing the work, or not wanting to do it. We've got, what we do see is nobody wants to build yet another overlay network for location. They want to figure out how to get it from LTE, from 3G. They don't want yet another different network and database to run for location. So, we're seeing a lot of pressure to just do it from the vantage point of just pure LTE and what ships today in LTE, and it's certainly possible. But it's the will of the service provider to make the implementation more than anything else.
From a basic commercial real estate side, the tipping point might be the next economic crisis, where a real estate owner wants to keep his tenants, and if your tenants are not in the sexiest space, they don't have all the technology, they're going to jump to those empty buildings that do have it. And so it may just be that. It may be I travel around every major city. We kind of, let's be honest, the densification issue is in what we call the NFL cities, right? That's where there's a lot of people and all I see is the newest, the American bird is not the eagle, it's the crane. Because they're building stuff for residential in every city I go to, Miami, New York, Boston, it's just crazy. So if we have that next economic crisis where all those empty buildings are sitting there, there'll be a fight for who has the tenants will leave one building, doesn't have the technology, and go to the other. So it's the innovative REIT owner that recognizes that we talk to, that says, that's how I want to make sure my building doesn't have my tenants leave. That's the way I look at it.
Smart.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Bill, you just brought up something that was really important from the REIT side in terms of the pain point of the building owners, and that pain point is money, right? At the moment their tenants start to leave is when they've reached the point where they have to consider, what do we want to do to maintain those tenants? And was at another event several months ago where I talked to another multi-tenant dwelling developer who said a year ago he didn't have any pain point. He kind of plumbed his buildings, but wasn't losing any money because people weren't leaving his building. So a year later, I talked to him. People were leaving his building, and then they were going on social media and telling other people to not go to that building because there was no wireless. So that pain point became exponential for him as a multi-tenant developer. Are your REITs starting to understand where that tipping point may be, and how close do you think they are to that pain point of beginning to lose money? Are we still further away, or are we inching closer to that?
I think sadly it's still the few, and I don't know what I don't know what percentage that is, but I still think it's the 10 or 15% of, and maybe it's the ones that have their buildings in REIT funds, and therefore they're buying a distressed property, which in their mind is less than 40% occupied. They've got to put some money into it, fix the common space, put some technology in it, and grow it to 80-90%, and then 3 years later in the fund it gets sold. So they're focused on the economic value. For a buy and hold owner, they just want to keep that occupancy up, and they want to figure out ways to raise rents in some form or fashion, whether it's through tenants or through other things going on. So you're right, it's that pain point for that specific owner. We go in and talk about that value proposition all the time of hey, if the market gets saturated, there's too much space, don't you want them staying in your space or coming to your space because you have that? So it's, as the carriers want us to do, we're selling to the real estate owners now. It's no longer our customer is please AT&T, please Verizon, help us put this network up. We've got to go to other places and build the business case for them and the value proposition. So but I don't think it's as many owners of buildings. We'd love to think they're all coming to these things or learning, going, gosh, I got to better get ahead of the wave, but they're not. It's still, again, I can't tell you the percentage, but maybe 10, 20% at best are really kind of there. Great.
Excellent, excellent. I'd like to thank the panelists for their time today. I'd also like to thank NEDAS. We appreciate your time. I know lunch is waiting, so thanks again. Appreciate it.